So my name is Helen Kirwan-Taylor. I'm a journalist, and I've had long COVID now for 2 years. And I've done, with Dr. Lewis here, quite a long journey. We did a bunch of stories together. We've been to a bunch of, long COVID clinics. She's been treating me, rather regrettably a lot of the time. And so I've really been looking both journalistically and as a patient at why, there is an explosion of long COVID. I mean, it's not, it is, and the reason I asked, I said we should call it this is because people aren't putting 2 and 2 together. And, Tam will explain this in a much better way, but they don't, they're not putting the shingles together with the herpes sores that they keep getting, with the fact that they can't get through the afternoon without a nap, to the fact that they've got the Lyme disease that they thought they had cured, that this virus is somehow entering our system and doing all kinds of things, maybe bypassing T cells, she will know. And so my journey has been both medical and natural. And natural is through supplement diet and biohacking, which is what they do here. So the theory, and then I'll let Tam do the medicine, the theory about long COVID now is that either it's a viral persistence, which means that we still all have it, and it's just not going away. This is very, this sounds like something and you'd see in the forums, but I've interviewed about 15 doctors on this subject, and every single one of them has said that this virus was designed to do exactly what it's doing now. It's designed to make us chronically sick. Because if you want to hurt the workforce, did you see the BBC today? That's something, I have the stat on my phone. The amount of people who have not gone back to work since this began is staggering. And you can take this conspiracy theory where you want, but if you wanted to hurt the West, if you wanted to undermine the American, which I think it was targeted to, American workforce, then give them something chronic, complicated, confusing, and just let them just be sick. And it's, you can't point fingers at it. So that's been my kind of working theory. And I have improved thanks a lot to people like Tam, 0 on the NHS, 0. They don't even know how to refer me. And so, thanks to Tam and, the supplements, antihistamines, which she will explain, by the way. And if you don't understand her, which happens, ask her again. And so I've taken something called low-dose naltrexone, which should be better known. So if any of you have not heard it, look it up, because it's one of the main things that's helping people. And then a supplementation that's all about building up the mitochondria and all sorts of things. And on the physical side, and then I'll shut up, the long COVID damages the nervous system. We know that now. And it damages the vagus nerve. And what people don't, again, put 2 and 2 together is that it's mental, it's physical, and it's also about the nervous system. So weirdly, all the woo-woo stuff that gets a bad press, the breathing, she's always on me that I don't do enough of this, the yoga, the massages, the osteopathy, those are all things that work on the nervous system. And I believe now that you can't really recover from this unless you treat the nervous system. And Amron is an absolutely brilliant osteopath who's treated me. For when I couldn't open my jaw, which is a lot of people have this. She treated me, but she didn't treat my jaw, she treated something else. So she will explain how it affects the nervous system and body work, which I know you believe in as well. And now we'll have a discussion. So
now we do the body work that's the boogie.
So Dr. Lewis, how does one? I don't think we need to explain what long COVID is. I think we need to. We all know it's exhaustion, confusion. People are having heart issues, every issue under the sun. But so, what do you think it is, and how do you think we can hope to get better?
Okay. So just for a little bit of context, maybe I can use the mic.
I think it works now. Fantastic.
Yes.
Yes.
So Helen said a little bit. I'm Dr. Tam. Many of you here already know me. I'm a medical doctor. I also qualified in psychiatry, so I have a psychiatry background, and I had long COVID since approximately March 2020. I met Helen, I think, in about July 2020. So we were on the journey pretty early on, and I was really sick then. I think arguably a little bit more sick than Helen. So we've been on a lot of that journey together. We went to many different clinics, very expensive clinics over in Germany to try everything. We threw everything at it. The turning point in my journey, which obviously has then helped the millions of people that I've helped subsequently, including Helen, was meeting a doctor called Dr. Paul Glynn, who came up with this. He was a UCL doctor working in emergencies, seeing all the acute COVID, but then also noticing that many people were experiencing what was akin to an allergic reaction to the COVID virus. He was the first person to note that antihistamine therapy was causing, in many people, a marked improvement in symptoms. This isn't just taking a one-off Piriton and thinking you're going to be okay. It's a dedicated daily triple therapy that was shown in his research to help people recover from the symptoms of long COVID, which were allergy, rash, joint inflammation, insomnia, brain fog. There's probably many others that I didn't think of. But that triple therapy, and also people like Donald Trump, how dare I call him a doctor, God, made this kind of therapy famous. It became the Trump regime as well, and everyone wanted Pepsid, which is famotidine. So when we talk about triple therapy, I'm going to stick on that for a minute because it is one of the sort of benchmarks that make.
So can you explain what an H1 and an H2 is? Because
so when we say allergic reaction to the COVID virus in some people, we don't know who and why, but if you have a history of allergy, seasonal allergies, mast cell activation syndrome, which is essentially when these cells that run around your body that contain histamine become trigger happy. They kind of explode to perceived stress in the environment, whether from food, from viruses, from chemicals, from mental stress, for example. So they release histamine. You don't want a lot of histamine running around your body. You get, like I said, all those symptoms that I've mentioned. So antihistamine therapy includes blocking H1 receptors, which is histamine type 1 receptors, and then histamine type 2 receptors, which are found in the gut, which is the famotidine type drug. So you want to block as many as you can, and then at night you take the mast cell stabilizer, which is things like ketotifen or montelukast, or even in some people's case clonazepam or Valium. They all act as mast cell stabilizers. So those have been very helpful for people alongside a low histamine diet. That means no avocados, no spinach, no fermented foods, no red wine, no beer, no Marmite, no cheeses, no anything that's even interesting. So there is some benefit from a low histamine diet in some people. And the whole idea in this therapy, not just the diet, but also the antihistamine therapy, is it resets these trigger-happy mast cells, which run around the body going ving, 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 causing the this, and the fatigue, because you're running around in that high histamine state. So that's one pillar of therapy. You can also take supplements that can support histamine clearance in the body, and one that's become very well known is quercetin phytosome. You can take diamine oxidase before you eat, which helps clear histamine. You can take N-acetylcysteine, which also works on detoxification in the body. Vitamin C, the non-acidic forms, also can help. So there's different ways to manage it, but histamine is definitely one pinnacle sort of treatment.
And let me ask you, don't the mast cells, because if you're looking at it naturalistically, you're just covering a symptom, right? But don't the mast cells have a shelf life of about 3 or 6 months? Don't they eventually replenish? Because is this just masking symptoms, or does it actually treat the cause?
No, it resets. The whole idea is that it helps reset the whole trigger happy system, and so then your body becomes damaged by this excess histamine, and if you take it away or at least reduce it, your body has a chance to heal a little bit. But of course, I'm a functional approaching doctor, and therefore we do look at root cause. Why do you have mast cell activation? Why do you have trigger happy mast cells? Why have you responded to COVID differently than your neighbour who had a snivel for 2 days? And there is a genetic component. There's also a personality component, and that's not psychologizing this illness, but we do know, and Paul Glynn's studies have shown this, that high achieving type A personality, high stressed, people with a history of PTSD, people with a history of unprocessed trauma, are getting long COVID more notably than people that don't have a history of those things. Now, this virus can, in some people, be a trauma, right? For many of you, you became very sick. The body felt traumatized. It felt like you couldn't trust your body anymore. And a lot of the work that I've done, that I initially introduced Helen to, and that Ambrin does a lot of work with, and I know we have Bonifaz here as well, who I do a lot of work with in Ibiza, and he's now based in London. He also does a lot of work on that nervous system resetting. And it's not woo, right? I'm coming at this from an MD perspective where you think, how does putting your hands on someone, manipulating the structure of the body and and talking, there's talking therapy, and there's the whole idea of, expressing how you feel and, perhaps linking current emotions to past events, which is very beneficial. So I would definitely encourage all of you to look at that side of things, that nervous system restoration. There's practically things you can do on your own if you can't afford the hands-on therapies. You can do breath work, and there's many online courses available, and also I use someone called the Breath Guy. I used to use his app religiously and do some like holotropic breathing, where you get into a very relaxed state and you go off and you float off and you feel very calm, and the world kind of stops for a while. You get out of your brain, you get into your body, and you suddenly feel safe. And that is where the body repairs itself, when you feel safe. And with this state of hypervigilance, which, having known Helen for a while, quite a while, I've seen that hypervigilant state in her a lot. That means that your body's always trying to figure out what the drama is, what the crisis is, and it's in a state of tension. That is not a state of repair, and it's not a state where your immune system functions effectively. So that's one thing, and then we'll come to sort of before I mention all the lifestyle hacks, for want of a better word, or tools and techniques that you can use. It's probably worth mentioning what Helen mentioned about low-dose naltrexone, because that was a turning point for me. I knew about this drug from working in functional medicine, that it was used a lot with people with Hashimoto's or other autoimmune diseases. And I had a bottle sitting in my fridge for about 6 months before my medical brain thought, oh, maybe I should take this. It felt too experimental for me. But it took, a few other doctors whom I trusted to recommend it for me to use it. And what it did was, I should explain quickly what it is. Naltrexone is a drug used in addiction, opiate addiction specifically. It blocks opiate receptors in the brain, so you don't get high from having your beer or your line of Coke or whatever your drug of choice was. But in low doses, I don't actually know how they found this out. They found, the starting dose for alcohol addiction is 50 milligrams. We start at 0.5 to 1 milligram, so it's tiny doses. And they show that it changes up the endorphin pathway in the brain, so you produce more endorphins. It also seems to work on the T cells, which are part of the immune system that become a little bit dysregulated in long COVID. They don't quite do their work properly. They get a bit dizzy. They kind of go off and spot things and start releasing, or start a pathway that then releases cytokines, which cause inflammation. So instead of like this nice linear pathway where you get a stimulus and you get an immune system response, they're kind of dropping bombs, or initiating the process of dropping bombs. So low-dose naltrexone seems to calm them down. So that means less cytokines, less inflammation, better immune system response. For me, and many like me, what I noticed is that my joint inflammation went away. I used to be a professional athlete. I've won Ironman triathlon. I've done a lot of crazy things. And with long COVID, I could barely walk up the stairs. So, and for a long time, I started low-dose naltrexone a year into my journey. Within 2 months, I could run over 5K.
On what dose?
You start at 0.5, you go up every week to a maximum of 4.5. So I got up to 4.5 after about a month, and I stayed on that for a year. What that did is not just work on the joint pain symptoms and that muscle fatigue, it also reduced my reliance on antihistamines. So I was able to drop the fexofenadine. I still am on famotidine, but that's also because I have a small hiatus hernia. So it reduced my histamine load because of the way it works on the T cells. So that's definitely something that I think is very beneficial. You have to then look at the serotonin system, which is super important and gets a bit weird, again, with COVID. This is why drugs like fluvoxamine, you may have heard, or even drugs like Prozac have been shown to help the recovery from long COVID. It's to do with platelet activation, which is involved in the whole serotonin response. You can become very tired, depressed, and insomniac. So for some people, SSRI therapy can be very helpful, even in short term. I myself was put on amitriptyline, which is not an SSRI. It works on noradrenaline, dopamine, and serotonin in small doses, and that was to help sleep. Because one of the first things I was told by Paul Glenn is, if you don't sleep, the number one thing we need to work on right now is getting you to sleep. Because I was going to bed with my heart racing at about 90, and everything was coming in. We'd get this dysautonomia, which many of you might have become familiar with as a notion, as a topic. That means essentially this fight and flight system is activated. We get the racing heart, we get the anxiety, we get this impending doom. We don't feel safe. And drugs like amitriptyline have calmed that down. Other things like this ketotifen, a type of antihistamine, that really calms everything down. So we need to get you sleeping. Of course, there's all the other natural sleep remedies like melatonin, which has been shown to be a brain antioxidant. So that can help to be supplemented. L-theanine, I'm a big fan of. Magnesium glycinate. And what else did I take it out? Oh, lavender extract.
Were you on HRT as well, bioidentical? Did you do any bioidentical?
Yeah, we should come to hormones. That's one after serotonin I'll come to. So yes, looking at the serotonin side of things, if you don't want to consider medication, I have to say amitriptyline has helped many people because it's a small dose, it helps sleep, but it seems to fill the tank. I don't know if any of you felt like you were trying to get your legs to do what your brain wanted to tell it, like it wasn't speaking, like you felt like you were dragging your legs through mud. So it kind of bolsters the neurotransmitter tank, the brain signaling. So that's one thing. But there are natural remedies that you can try first: 5-hydroxytryptophan, 5-HTP, L-tryptophan, and things like that. And things in the morning, like Dr. Lee talks a lot about, like L-tyrosine, nootropics, bacopa. All of these things support your brain's natural production of neurotransmitters. And quite frankly, long COVID gives brain inflammation. You get in a funk. You have no desire, motivation, etc., and high emotionality. So anything you can look at, that whole branch of nootropics and brain support is super important. Right, HRT. I was with Louise Newsom yesterday, who runs Menopause Health, as was Dr. E. We were at a conference where she presented about the importance of HRT for long COVID. HRT is hormone replacement therapy. There's big studies being shown that people in the perimenopause and early menopause, where you're having fluctuating hormone levels, or if you have a history of an eating disorder, for example, where you have very low hormone levels, specifically estrogen, you are more prone to having symptoms of long COVID. And when you treat the low hormone levels with body identical, that means the same as your body produces hormones, then symptoms get better. Estrogen affects serotonin in the brain. They're very closely linked. However, estrogen also affects histamine release, so it has to be balanced. You can't just do a blanket one-size-fit. But I was given cyclical HRT, which I won't complicate you too much with. It just basically meant that when my estrogen levels were mostly low, and that is leading into your period, I took 5 days of estrogel, and I took 14 days of body-identical progesterone. I still maintain that. Progesterone, the calming, it's one of the big pregnancy hormones. You can take orally, helps you sleep, also can make you moody. You can take it as pessary, rectally, or vaginally. But what that also does is support this enzyme DAO, which helps clear histamine from the body. Many women can be low in progesterone. As we get into perimenopause, we don't ovulate often, especially if we're stressed, especially if we have COVID, and therefore we don't produce progesterone. So we feel anxious, we feel bloated, and we feel higher in histamine. So I would definitely recommend everyone to, if that is something that if you're having irregular periods, for example, or you're having muscle aches, it's worth doing a blood test to check your hormone levels, to check your thyroid levels, to check your estrogen and your progesterone. And if you are a menstruating female, you'll need to do that between approximately 10 days before your period is due. That is the right time for the blood test.
Something else I wanted to ask you about is, weirdly, the studies have, so low-dose naltrexone has just been in the news. So it's become, it's a very well-known drug in ME, and it is one of the few drugs you can actually get an NHS doctor to prescribe. But you do have to hit them with evidence. And if you Google it, you'll find that there have been at least 10 stories on it recently. And that gives them, because it is not a dangerous drug, it's a safe drug, and it's a drug well known to them, because a lot of what Tam is talking about is not easy to access. But one of the things that I've read about is that actually long COVID is low cortisol, not high cortisol. So stress is high cortisol, but weirdly, so it's an adrenal issue, isn't it, in part? And a lot of I've seen so many different people, a lot of the therapy I'm having now is addressing adrenal fatigue. So, and if you say to a proper, to a doctor, I have adrenal exhaustion, he'll say you're crazy, because if you did, you'd be dead. But we do seem it does, the fatigue that is also, by the way, burnout, a lot of these syndromes are adrenal. And that's one of the things that I think you can help with supplements. So, and with food, and even simple things like going into the light. We talked about this. Go into the light first thing in the morning, because it affects your cortisol levels, and then avoid screens at night, because that affects your cortisol level in a much more profound way than I think we realize. But why don't you address the cortisol?
Sure.
And then you can take it from there, because she would physically deal with it.
Cortisol is the major stress hormone in the body. We need it. We need not too much, and we need not too little. The problem is, level per se, it's the fluctuation of the hormone level, so it being cortisol. So we're meant to have a nice rise in cortisol to get us out of bed in the morning, and then it kind of flattens off as the day, and it goes nice and low before you go to bed. What seems to be happening with long COVID and other chronic fatigue-based illnesses is that you don't get this cortisol awakening response, which means you feel very sluggy, you feel very brain fogged when you wake up, and you don't have that get up and go drive. But you get this inappropriate then release of cortisol late at night often, which means you don't sleep. So we need to do a process of retraining this whole circadian rhythm and production of cortisol when you're meant to have it. And that can be impacted, as Helen said, by light therapy, and that's difficult on days like this, but you can do it artificially using things like the Lumi light. You can use red light therapy as well, which also impacts brain health and mood. So that's super important. But to come back to the point of, we are dynamic beings. We don't have a one-stop cortisol level, right? Our cortisol level today might be different in an hour's time. Well, in fact, it will be different in an hour's time. And it may change month to month. But we do know that people who fail to mount a good cortisol response are not able to don't clear the virus as well as other people, and that often comes with a history of dysregulation of your nervous system, which includes things like PTSD or other traumas in the body. Also, adrenal fatigue or burnout is essentially when you've been living on your adrenals for a long period of time. That's a sense of being in a life that you know is not sustainable. You're living on caffeine, you're not sleeping deeply, you're relying on other stimulants, you feel wired. That is a high cortisol state. Often then what happens is the body goes, this isn't sustainable, I'm going to shut down the demand. They don't fatigue as such, but the brain says to the adrenal glands, which produce cortisol amongst other things, look guys, if we keep on producing this much cortisol, we're going to go into a catabolic, a breakdown state, and that is really not a good thing. So they shut it off, so they get you to go into hibernation, and you feel crap with low cortisol. You feel very tired, you feel very low mood, you get a suppressed immune response, and you suppress wound healing, etc. So you can support cortisol production with some of these amazing teas and tinctures that are going on here. Adaptogenic herbs like American ginseng, for example, stimulates cortisol. Licorice stimulates cortisol. You can go on supplements like 7-keto-DHEA, which is one of my staples, which supports the adrenal gland with its adrenal precursors. You can take B vitamin complex, specifically B5. It's very good for the adrenals. Vitamin C is very good for the adrenals. But then you can't just walk around like a rattling pharmacy shop like I've been accused of. You have to look at the lifestyle factors. And I, for one, moved my life to Ibiza for a year in order literally to change the way I lived my life. So I wasn't running around like London on a bicycle being a single mum. I was living in a wellness resort or living in an environment which was conducive to healing and surrounded by people who would enable that healing. So some of those people are people like Amber who do wonderful work on the nervous system.
I'm just going to ask, so vagus nerve is very, very in at the moment if you on TikTok. So, and people talk about it, but I don't think anybody actually really understands. But we do know that COVID damages the vagus nerve, and that's where a lot of the work is. So can you explain this famous celebrity nerve?
I don't think it damages the nerve. You're not going to say that, are you? No.
But can everyone, all right. My name's Amber Furr. I'm an osteopath and I've been practicing for 25 years.
And you had long COVID.
And I had long COVID. I mean, I feel like I'm in good company because it was March 2020 and we've all had our separate journeys on this. I think I'm at least 80% on the good side of COVID now. There's certain things that actually do play out from day to day, but my energy levels and by and large everything is relatively back to normal, but I'm not ready to run a marathon just yet. Not to say I was before either. So the vagus nerve is something that at least everyone would have heard of. If not, does anybody know much about it? Is there a raised hands of who knows anything about it?
No.
Okay, we've got a few, so this is good. So yeah, Bonnie knows some. So we have, it's a cranial nerve that stems from that emerges from your brainstem. It's the longest cranial nerve in your body, the longest nerve in your body, and very largely responsible for your parasympathetic nervous system, 75%. So it doesn't damage per se, but the vagus nerve, I put this picture on, it's not going to turn into an anatomy lesson, but it's there to just demonstrate the fact that it is far-reaching. So it affects your lungs, your heart, your stomach, your eyes, you know, it's got a motor component, a sensory component, afferent. It is an organ regulator, so it's inherently important for the parasympathetic nervous system to regulate. So the feedback from the organs goes and is modulated in the brainstem so that your body can self-correct. And one thing that I have to say, coming from a slightly different perspective, as far as osteopathy, we're not pharmaceutical based, and so naturally is always my preferred route. But supplementation and some of the things that Dr. Tam was saying are absolutely invaluable, and we do need to actually rely on external supplementation and external medicines where indicated. But the crux of it to me, from an osteopathic point of view, is the fact that this nerve exits the brainstem and is there to regulate. And it's to regulate in amongst this amazing, histamine reaction that's going on in the body, the cytokine release from the T cells in terms of a cytokine storm. So the body is there trying to deal with it, but it deals with it so ferociously that sometimes it actually ends up damaging good tissue as well. So we have to look at the respiratory system, we have to look at the cardiovascular system, we have to look at the fluid mechanics through the body, because without those fluid mechanics, we are going to stagnate. So this low-grade inflammation and toxicity or post-viral load, whatever you want to call it. There was a stat that said I believe it was June 2021, there was 2 million people in this country suffering from long COVID. The descriptors of long COVID, as you know, are far and wide. There's over 100 symptoms reported, researched, saying they're post-COVID effects. So it affects everybody differently. But one thing we know for sure is it limits the oxygen getting to the body. and it limits the as far as the respiratory component goes, it attacks the alveoli, and it attacks the the words just gone from my mind, but it attacks the alveoli at a point where your capillary beds are under stress and you're not being able to fluid exchange. You need oxygenation to your peripheries for function, but also for repair. Now, coming back to the vagus nerve, if we've got the parasympathetic nervous system that's under, in this environment of chaos, in this environment of low-grade inflammation, not able to perform its function of modulating good organ function because of the fact that it's compromised. So the nerve itself can't perform the function that it needs to perform. And when you look at the COVID as a disease, illness, virus, whatever you want to call it, all of the above, it affects these different organs through the ACE inhibitor, which I'm sure everybody's sick of hearing about. But it affects all these different organs, and these different organs aren't sequential. There's no period of it first attacks the lungs and the heart, etc. So you need to actually understand that we're dealing on a basic level of trying to approach the oxygenation to the tissue. So things like movement. Movement, it seems simplistic, quite rightly, as you said, Tam, that people don't often associate, what's breathing going to do for me? But if you can't get individual movement, if you can't get segmental movement for your spine, which then taps into the sympathetic nervous system, the ganglia that run on the side of the spine, going up the thoracic spine, if you can't get the ribs to function well, the chest expansion to happen well, your body isn't going to be able to get to those small capillary beds that need to be starting to move and function in a way that requires movement. So the worse we feel, the worse it is to actually be able to get up and do something. So the brain fog doesn't help. The incredible work that both of these ladies has done over the past two, or actually, I haven't heard them talk yet, but I'm sure it's just as good. But all of these people have suffered the same condition and path and journey. We've all handled it slightly differently, but what we do know is that sitting here now, a year and a half later, it's easy to actually come back to you, but when you're going through it, it's quite hard to actually make sense of what to do next and what sequence and who to follow and what makes sense for you. But you have to take it down to a basic level of move, breathe. It's important that you actually address some of the techniques we do in osteopathy work directly onto the vagus nerve via either dampening or stimulating, depending on what the body needs. And like any other nerve, people understand the sciatic nerve very well because everybody talks about lumbar pain and sciatic nerve entrapment. The vagus nerve is a nerve. It's a long nerve that goes and passes through many different organs, viscera, fascia, and there's different areas where it can get impeded. There's different areas where it can have blockages and restrictions, and that's dependent on your post-history as well. So
And I'm going to ask you a simple question because there are a lot of things you can do that are easy and don't cost anything and don't even mean seeing anyone. So can you, because singing,
yeah.
Should we sing
calming,
Yeah.
very simple rapid eye movements which stimulate, but she'll explain it, but can you just give examples of what we can do just every day?
Yeah. So
One of them is this one, isn't it, where you go from side to side with your eyes?
that's what she came to the clinic with, rather than one I give out. But you can actually, as simple as it sounds, you're quite right, humming actually is a really nice way to actually stimulate the motor component of the vagus nerve. Good tongue positioning as well. That sounds an odd thing to say, but a functional swallow is a really important sign for the vagus nerve. Making sure that you're actually exercising your mouth. So I give an exercise to patients and it looks ridiculous, but you have to actually start to do different tongue exercises and open up that sort of large muscle in your mouth, because it has a direct relationship on how your skull sits on the first two vertebrae of your neck. So things like that, we all know about, cold water, cryotherapy. That's great in terms of sorry.
Recalibration.
Yeah, recalibration, exactly right. So and I think you're probably going to speak a little bit more on that. I mean, this is a very nice transition.
Well, also, yeah, and also so biohacking is where we come in here, and so a lot of the things that you do, you can do naturally. I think you can speed up considerably. And one of the things that has been researched, and we did a lot of this together, is hyperbaric oxygen therapy, which a lot of you have done here. And that is getting really good clinical results across the board here and in the US. Unfortunately, it's not something we can do at home. Well, you can rent one or on the NHS, but this is something Dr. E can. So what helps people here?
Shall I introduce myself briefly? So I'm Dr. Inayat. My stage name is Dr. E, because a lot of people can't say my name phonetically, especially when I'm calling EE on the mobile phone and asking them to sort my contract out. I've been a GP for quite a few years now, maybe up to 10 years. And I came across an alternative approach to look at the body when I first worked in the stem cell industry in 2007. That really opened my eyes into the internal healing capacity of the body, how the body is made to self-regulate and regenerate. Go on to finish my training, and during my clinical years I did a fellowship a DASI fellowship, which during that time I worked to connect prison medicine up with Pentonville by telemedicine. I was always fascinated in driving innovation. But the reason why I bring this up, one of the most interesting experiences during that time was setting up something called an expert patient group. This is in Islington, where we set up expert diabetic patients, people that had lived with diabetes for a long time, to train newly diagnosed diabetic patients to self-manage their condition. This blew my mind as a doctor, where I thought we have the answers to go to an expert patient group and see patients give answers to the other patients, the nuances of living with that condition. As these amazing ladies have lived with that condition, they can tell you the nuances of living with long COVID and things that they've tried, which makes all the difference compared to a doctor who hasn't lived with that condition. So I just wanted to raise that. And I think we've asked a couple of our kind of patients that have joined us, and Peter, Sophie, have both had long COVID and been introduced to us because of that. So I thought it's a great juncture to speak to them. But before I do, I want to ask you guys, what symptoms, who here feels that they've suffered with long COVID? If you put your hands up, if you've suffered at some point with long COVID. So I'd say about 60% of the room. Of those 60%, what symptoms have you had? Have you had energy disruption? Yeah, common. Have you had brain fog?
Yes.
Yeah.
Common. Have you had any inflammatory symptoms? I mean, like rashes, skin hives, joint aches, joint pains? Yeah.
Yes.
And have you had breathing difficulties?
Yes.
Okay, so those typically are what we're seeing in practice here at HUM2N. People come and find us when they're not getting the answers from the long COVID clinics, when they've heard about us through the content and education we're pushing out from ambassadors that we work with. And we're seeing that when we break it down into those 4 areas, improving energy production, reducing inflammation in your body, drivers of inflammation that come from your external environment, and the way you process those inflammatory things, right? Because ultimately COVID is a virus that's not normal to us, and therefore our immune system activates and produces an inflammatory response which manifests in multiple different ways, including within your alveoli, leakiness of the blood vessels, all the way to brain fog, etc., and histamine, eosinophils, etc. So
palpitations, heart inflammation, all of that.
yeah, it's just such a systemic condition, right? It affects all of your organs. And what we're seeing also, we're not really touched upon, and I was listening to something earlier, is there's a growing community of GPs and doctors that are raising awareness about sudden cardiac conditions that are rising after vaccination or after long COVID. And we're not fully understanding it. And I always say this, like 1990s was about heart health, 1980s, 1990s, heart health and strokes. And we got on top of it to some degree. 90s and 2000s was about metabolism, blood sugar control. Now it's all about inflammation.
Yeah.
COVID has brought on a new dawn of understanding of inflammation. And what is inflammation? Ultimately, it's your overactivation of your immune system, an innate function within us that we regulate ourselves through the way we sleep, eat, move, engage with the external environment, what goes in our body, what goes outside, what goes into our ears, what goes into our eyes, what goes into our mouth. The external processing of this external environment and our ability to process it efficiently through good digestive tract, good absorptive capacity through the gut lining, healthy intestinal wall, good detoxification processes. These are the way we engage with the external environment and process it, because our body's made to be able to do it. Stem cell production in the evenings. If we're getting our deep sleep, if we're doing the things that Tam's talking about, and if we're doing the things that Ambri's talking about, we're going to be getting a deeper sleep when we produce our own natural stem cells, because we know as we get older, we don't produce as many stem cells. Autophagy, who's heard of intermittent fasting? Pretty much everyone here, because it became really famous in the last 5 years. Why did it become really famous? Because autophagy, intermittent fasting, causes autophagy, autophagy, auto-cleaning, cleaning of your aged, dying cells. This is a process we don't do as efficiently as we get older. Why is that? It's because the body is degrading from the time, I know none of wants to hear this, but from our 20s onwards. We're pre-programmed to die, right? And the body produces its maximum efficiency in its processes, from where I see it from a longevity science perspective, in its 20s. And it's variable, those processes, between person to person, depending on how we rev the engine, engage with the environment. Who has a car or drives a car here? Everyone, right? We know that if we drive a car in poor external environments, revving the engine all day long, what's going to happen? The exhaust pipes, your MOT is going to fail, your exhaust pipe's not going to work as efficiently, your brake lights are not going to work, your tire tread is going to go down. Now, if you think of the health system as doing MOTs, they check, is your car or is your body roadworthy? Is it going to fall down when you leave the clinic? Is it going to collapse? But this type of healthcare that we're looking at is, how do we identify and fine-tune the human body to make it work like it did 5 years ago? How do you upregulate stem cell production? How do you optimize nutrient delivery, improve angiogenesis, new blood vessel creation? And so that's where this methodology at HUM2N has deriven from, has come from. It's a combination of a good understanding of longevity science and the processes that slow down as we age, in combination with functional medicine, which looks at the root causes, real-time physiology, an interconnected approach that connects up your organs, not just an end organ approach.
There we go.
Sorry, guys.
No, it's all right, don't worry, it's just water. And not just an end organ. Traditional medicine is your organ going to break down approach. And so the way we deliver that here at HUM2N is we take you through data, testing journey, where we look at the important foundations of health first, and we've got a whole journey of testing that we can take you on, but we're making sense of all of the functional, deep, integrated testing that you can do to say what's important. How do you build back a human being to being strong and resilient? You've got to start with the key pituitary adrenal thyroid axis, the hormone axis, very important. And just to add to the adrenal dysfunction, what we're commonly seeing is that when the adrenals go off, your thyroid goes off. There's this condition where you get something called pregnenolone steal, the precursors to both of those. And you're seeing thyroid dysfunction. Now, thyroid is your energy currency of your cells, so chronic stress or perceived stress, right? It's not always, we only perceive stress, like when we know it's stress. But sometimes there's all these biological stresses we don't even realize that we're having a stress response to. That's what causes adrenal fatigue over time, because your adrenals just get tired. Then your thyroid starts to kick in to try and compensate. Your pituitary gland starts to work harder to get your energy currency of your cells up, and then your TSH goes up. And if you've got inflammation, you chuck inflammation into the mix, you've got digestive tract, leaky gut, for example, you will start to, foods, bacteria, viruses will get through those leaky gut junctions and drive an immune response. Those antibodies will circulate around your body, attack your thyroid, attack your joints. And now we understand, functional medicine has shown us, and we've seen over 1,000 patients in this methodology, because I started functional medicine in 2015, And as a GP, I wanted to see if this works. I worked with some of the faculty from the US at designing these programs and practicing it on private patients that we were recruiting and making sense of it. We've seen time and time again, this functional medicine approach makes people feel better. That's what healthcare is about. It's feeling better, better energy, better mood, better sleep. Now, do we have the answer to long COVID? No and yes, depends where you're at. How far down, how far progressed, how systemic? Do we need to go medical with it? That's what the traditional medical system's for, will give you the drugs. But if your fringe symptoms, energy dysregulation, brain fog, low-grade inflammation, this is what HUM2N can do to help. And I'll put it on the screen, but there's studies now proving hyperbaric medicine works. Significant improvement of quality of life and symptoms from 20 sessions of hyperbaric. That's clinical studies that I'm seeing now. We've known this just by understanding the science. We were the first practice in the UK to custom make a hyperbaric chamber 7 years ago, multi-person chamber. Why? Because we really believe in the simple science of hyperoxygenating cells will improve cellular function. Hyperoxygenating in a pressurized cabin will drive stem cells to be produced from your bone marrow, right? So these are principles that are just applied against the aging process. Yeah, so we're seeing for mitochondrial function, energy production, hyperbaric works really, really well. And then the other thing that we're doing for our long COVID patients is NAD+, especially if you're above 40. NAD+, who's heard of NAD+? Yeah, we definitely have. Many of you guys have heard of NAD+. It's a cofactor found, it's a molecule found in any of our cells. And guess where it works? In our mitochondria. What happens in our mitochondria? Now let's just think of the cell. Very basic science. Cell has a nucleus and an engine. The nucleus contains our DNA. That drives the cell in the direction it needs to go. Translates DNA into RNA, which tells your body what nutrients to make into different proteins, hormones, and enzymes. The mitochondria takes oxygen and makes energy through a really complex process called the Krebs cycle. It requires good levels of NAD that depletes, been shown, but depletes by the age of 40 to depleted by 50%. We're seeing time and time again when we're applying these basic science principles. This isn't complex drug-based, requires massive clinical trials, dangerous drugs, medicine. This is basic science that we're applying. We're seeing people feel better and better and better and better. And I wish, when I qualified as a physician, I went through the whole kind of trying to drive innovation through the health system as a leadership fellow in working at academic health science networks, banging my head against a brick wall. And so what did I do? I created a practice where I could recruit clients and deliver this type of care. And that's what HUM2N's about. It's a human lab, but it's delivering care safely. We're building evidence, and we're going to be changing practice with communities and conversations like this over time. I'm going to pass it to Peter.
Can I just bring it to life a bit about how practically all of that amazingly detailed information you give, like what it looks like. So, for example, if you were to come to HUM2N and do sort of, an assessment, you would do a lot of blood work, for example. You'd do blood work, you'd have a look at gut health, which means doing a stool test. This is the kind of thing that I would do too and other functional doctors. But what the nice thing about here is that you have all the biohacking tools, which I've been using as an athlete for 15 years. What we now know is that these appliances, like hyperbaric oxygen, like red light therapy, like infrared sauna, and cryotherapy, all of these tools have been shown to improve the way the body works. So you would go through a process where you'd have a really deep dive on what's happening in your body, much more than you'll ever see in the NHS, because you just literally get told everything's normal until it's really not normal. And then you'd go through a process where you put together a program, and what that looks like for many people is doing like 20 sessions of hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I don't know if you've seen the chamber downstairs, but you can go in there with a few friends, you can do business meetings in there, you can take your laptop in there, although it's sometimes nice to go in there and relax. You can then do cryotherapy, which is a 3-minute where you feel very cold, and that enhances the resilience of the body, for example. And then red light therapy, which again improves brain function and mood. So I just wanted to kind of like bring that to life, just to say how this all fits together. And these are all things that I've incorporated into my day-to-day. I hired a hyperbaric oxygen therapy chamber, but it doesn't go to the depth that medical grade ones like Dr. Ehans here does, but it meant I could do it every day when I was really unwell. I bought an infrared sauna, for example, because it encourages you to sweat, encourages you to move, improves endorphins, so improves your mood. And also, practically speaking, getting outside, getting light, being in nature. Don't forget your friends, don't forget your community. But you must look into this other aspect as well of the nervous system, the immune system, and all those things that we've talked about. Super important.
I think we're meant to ask, so this is Pete, who we met in this July, and poor Pete was really, really sick, and he's now almost fully recovered. So why don't you tell us what you did?
Hi everyone, my name's Peter. Sounds like an alcoholic. I've had long COVID for 6 months. I'm at the end of my journey that I started 6 months ago. When I got COVID, I thought I'm fine, I can get through it. So for about 2 months, I went back and forth until I just had a major crash. And then I've been on medical leave for about 4 months. I guess the turning point for me was when I met Helen, who was able to guide me and kind of point me in the right direction, which was at one of the clinics she mentioned. And for me, I think the thing that I've learned through it all, which you probably got a sense from listening to everyone on the panel, is that it's very much a multi-pronged approach. There are a number of different things you have to do. There's no one thing that will fix the long COVID. And indeed, it's different for everyone that has long COVID because everyone's different, and there might be some sort of underlying symptom. And so for me, that underlying symptom, which was alluded to, was I had a lot of stress in my life, quite high stress, high pressure, high intensity job. I had a few things that happened to me. I had my father passed away at the beginning of the year. I had a lawsuit that I was dealing with as well. My sister, who I'm very close with, was going through a divorce. So there was quite a lot my wife was expecting as well. So there was a lot on my plate, and my wife's plate. So the first thing for me really was acceptance that I needed to slow down, because I was the type of person that I would just bow through things, have a to-do list, and get it done, even if it could wait until tomorrow or next week. But the main things that helped me, I would say, were so acceptance at the start, learning to slow down, pacing. Then in terms of the supplements, I actually worked with Dr. Tam as well. She helped me a great deal in terms of putting me on a supplement regime. I worked with Dr. E. I did hyperbaric oxygen chamber along with NAD+. That helped me a lot. I felt a big difference from that. And then the other things that were alluded to, hot cold therapy. I now take cold showers every single morning. I think that helps me immensely. I also do sauna, cold shower in order to clear my circulation, help the inflammation help reduce the inflammation that was in my body. I also changed my diet, a very alkaline diet, and then the other thing was sleep. I focused a lot on my sleep. I have a bedtime routine. I think a lot of people think I'm kind of crazy with my bedtime routine. But one of the things that really changed my sleep and allowed me to get better deep sleep was I got a cooling mattress, so I could set the temperature of my bed, because you get much deeper sleep at a colder temperature. And I also took amitriptyline, which Dr. Tam mentioned as well, which also helped with my REM sleep. So yeah, that's a quick and dirty back into my experience. I'm about to go back to work, so
Congratulations.
I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards.
Maybe just a question for anybody who can answer. Is that HBOT 20 sessions at what frequency? Once a day, once a week?
I like to stack them as closely together as possible. From what I found is that you get the best cumulative effects with hyperbaric rather than doing them sparingly in the studies, and they have shown that you do them as closely as together.
But why don't they have hyperbaric hotels? It seems like it's time, you know.
In Silicon Valley, this whole company.
Because it just seems you check in for 10 days and do it all day long and just get it over with, because it's just too
There's
boring.
clinics like the Aviv clinics you might be referencing, but you know, Aviv clinics is a spin-off from the Guy's medicine for longevity. So it's been recent. They did studies maybe within the last 12 months to show that it reverses your biological age and the processes that cause aging. And then some of the backers behind it have spun off a group of clinics called the Aviv clinics. They're very expensive. They charge $50,000 for a 6 to 8 week program doing predominantly hyperbaric oxygen, nutritional interventions, and it's sad. I find it sad as a physician, but because it shouldn't be priced at that level. So there are hyperbaric, really expensive hotels out there in the world. Yeah, I just want to bring Sophie in as well because I think Sophie heard about us through you as well.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Sophie. I also was brought to Human by Helen. I got long COVID about 6 months ago. Didn't really understand what it was. Went to see a lot of doctors, and I found myself getting increasingly frustrated with the doctors not having any understanding of what it was or kind of any path to recovery. They all just kind of said the same thing: you just need to rest. It will go away in a few months. After a few months, very much hadn't gone away. I was off work, and I'm also one of those people who struggles really to just rest and do nothing. So I think I was really prolonging getting better because I just refused to actually stop. But luckily, I spoke to Helen and she sent me here, and I've been doing the hyperbaric therapy. Probably had it over 20 sessions now. And that for me was the biggest game changer in terms of actually seeing faster results. I changed my diet and did a lot of work on my nervous system and calming my nervous system down, and that definitely was helping, but it was quite a slow process. So I started doing hyperbaric oxygen therapy. For me, I guess the measure of improvement was when I first started doing it, I was falling asleep every time I went into the chamber. I think it just makes your body kind of relax. I'm not sure what it is. But then the more I was doing it,
blanket, right? Because it's pressuring, and you're like,
yeah, exactly.
Physiologically it's driving a healing response.
Yeah, exactly.
When we're sick, we sleep because our energy is used to self-heal. So we find that a lot.
My body really needed that, and I was having trouble sleeping as well. I would either not be able to go to sleep or I'd wake up super early. After sort of 15, maybe a few less sessions, I was really starting to feel like my normal self. I was doing work in the oxygen tank, and the brain fog symptoms were really starting to go as well. My brain fog symptoms were so bad at the beginning that I would constantly forget what I was doing. I would go into a room and just not remember why I was there. But that has really gone down a lot. I'm now working nearly full time. I think it's really, really helped me. I think obviously there's a lot of other things to be doing as well, and the calming the nervous system for me also massively important because I think getting long COVID made me realise there was a lot of underlying health problems that I had, particularly with diet, stress. So a lot of that I needed to address as well. But in terms of speeding up my recovery, the work I've done here has been hugely helpful for me. I definitely don't think I would be where I am now if I hadn't come here. I know there's probably quite a long way to go, but I think the work that everyone's doing around this is hugely appreciated because I think a lot of the community, especially in the NHS, just aren't particularly clued up yet on what kind of things are helping people.
Right. So, does anybody have? Thank you. Does anybody have? I did have one question. Which is unfortunately what just happened to me is I was getting better and better thanks. I've been here for ozone. Ozone is one more thing we haven't discussed, which is I think a fairly well-known process which actually kills bacteria and viruses. I've done NAD. I don't do enough hyperbaric. But what about reinfections? Because you know, I'm hearing a lot of long COVIDers because they get reinfected, and that time it hits them, and some people having it 3 to 4 times. I've just actually ordered the nasal spray from Israel today, the one that apparently stops the process. But what's going to happen if we just keep getting reinfected, or how do we stop the whole cytokine storm from starting all over again?
I can speak to that a little bit. There's just been a study published in Nature, which is a big scientific journal, that was quite depressing actually. It showed that the more times you get infected, the worse your health outcomes are, essentially. So what it's highlighting is that long COVID is a massive public health crisis that the NHS can't afford. So your question is, and that was whether you'd been vaccinated or unvaccinated, which is a sort of death knell for vaccination, saying that, you know, it's really not helping improving health outcomes. Definitely not as much as we thought. So Helen's question about reinfection, I mean, we should start off by mentioning that viral persistence that was kind of alluded to in the beginning. That means that we coexist with the virus, a bit like glandular fever, EBV, Epstein-Barr virus. We coexist with it. Our body's immune system keeps levels down, but it exists in the gut, it exists in different parts of the body. There is some evidence from tissue biopsies that COVID lives on in the bodies. They found it in people that have died a year later. They found it in people's brains. They found it in people when they've done gut biopsies of living people. So there is the argument that it lives on in the body, and that our immune system just gets used to it, right? It's a constant battle between, you know, how we keep levels down. We just learn to live with it. And that's the other case with what we call co-infections. So you mentioned Lyme disease, EBV. All of these things, our immune systems all the time have to fight or work. If they're working well, they keep levels down and we function kind of okay. But this is an energy-consuming process, which is why one of the things Dr. B said about improving energy production, which is using things like improving gut health, using hyperbaric oxygen therapy, using red light therapy, using infrared saunas, all of those improve how we generate energy. So back to reinfections. Many of you might have had COVID more than once. I certainly have. What it tends to do is cause similar reaction in the body, but that is because your body has this immune memory, and it can become scared of having the same reaction again. And essentially, I remember quite vividly and I actually remember calling Boniface saying, I feel really anxious, and that was how I felt the first time with COVID. Super anxious, like something really bad was happening. And the second time, even though I wasn't that sick, I had fever, etc., I felt this existential anxiety that the world was imploding. And that's COVID's effect on the nervous system. And that is where you get the inflammation, and that is where you get the insomnia and all the other problems. So acknowledging that is the number one thing, and then also doing work to improve, you know, how that anxiety affects the body and all of the things that we've mentioned and calm it down. But I think it's very hard to avoid reinfection. I think what we're seeing is that the virus is mutating as they do to become less virulent, in that it causes less harm every time it infects people. But if you're not recovering from the first infection, then of course it's going to step you down a level, and that's essentially what I'm seeing. And that's why I'm telling people to throw everything at it if they get reinfected. And that's, you know, for me, when I got reinfected the second time, I had IV ozone literally on day 2. I was lucky enough to have that. I had someone that was willing to give me it with COVID masked up, and essentially I went negative on day 4. So I mean, it literally nuked it, and I was a big skeptic of these things, but you know, it basically has that strong property. Also, high doses of things like black seed oil, which contains something called thymoquinone, which is very antiviral, super helpful. Big doses of vitamin C, like you're talking like 10 grams a day, and this doesn't have to be expensive. It's just vitamin C powder you can buy. It might upset the stomach and cause diarrhea, but that's okay. But you know, this is not 1 gram. It's not a Holland Barrett dose. It's big doses. It's big doses of vitamin D.
How high can you go on vitamin D safely?
Well, it's temporary, right? So you're just doing it during the treatment effect. So you might be taking 5,000 to 10,000 units a day. Similar with vitamin A, which is a fat-soluble vitamin. All of these have antiviral activity.
What about ivermectin? Were you using that?
Yeah, I mean,
We've all done.
I mean, it comes and goes in popularity. I've done courses of ivermectin. I feel like it did something to my gut beneficially, because there was one of my first symptoms of COVID in the first instance, because I had it breathed into me, literally coughed into me, was gut. And we know that that it like hangs out there. So ivermectin is.
What kind of gut symptoms did you have?
Like
diarrhea.
Explosive,
Okay, well.
pain and diarrhea. I found inhabited, like it was like boom, within 12 hours. So I think for people that have ongoing gut symptoms of COVID, it's worth doing a stool test to see if you've got a good level of what we call commensal, or good diversity of bacteria, good things that improve resilience in your gut.
There have also been 2 probiotics that have now been put through some clinical trials, and which are helping a lot of people. And if anybody wants to know, I'll put it on, but because I won't remember the name. But that they're showing that there's remnants of COVID in the gut for like 7 months afterwards. And so obviously, if it's in there, it's disrupting. But people have found they've gotten enormous benefit from
Good probiotics.
But you have
Definitely can help.
But they have to be a specific brand. I mean, I just read about this yesterday. They have to be one of these specific brands. Simprove is on the list. So if anybody here has not tried Simprove, then that's, an easy thing to start. But your ordinary probiotics don't count.
Don't really count. I mean, again, that's just improving the good army. I think there's a lot of studies going into antivirals, like Talovud and Paxlovid, that have been shown to reduce viral replication. So if it is coexisting with us, then at least we're going to keep the levels down. Ivermectin is something that was, again, another Trump drug that perhaps may help people. Some people say I think it works better prophylactically, it's my clinical experience. If we're at high COVID times, like potentially now, and there's a lot going around, if you take a 3 to 6 milligram dose once a week, people aren't seemingly getting it in the first place. I don't think it's having the same efficacy in treatment, and there's quite a lot of trials that have proven that it hasn't been effective.
So, a question for newly inoculated COVID patients, because obviously the virus is mutating to be less dangerous for new. Are you hearing like people contact you saying, I'm newly, I haven't had COVID before, but I've got COVID now, and you're seeing that the symptoms aren't as bad? Yeah, it's very.
I mean, if you've avoided COVID this long, I mean, it's practically a miracle, and I can count the people on my hand that haven't had COVID at least.
I'm just really interested by that re-inoculation study.
But the latest virus is not showing up on tests. It's really gone stealth. So I think a lot of people are walking around with COVID who don't know they have it, and they're infecting people, and they don't mean to, because I just felt hot, and my instinct was, this feels a bit hot, so I took it, and I was red right away, and I've been, I think, in contact. But then I did the whole sort of ivermectin thing, but there is a rebound with this virus, which is that you knock it and it comes flying back, so you have to kind of assume it's going to take a lot longer to clear it than that, even if you have nothing wrong with you.
I'm interested to know your perspective. And as we don't go on too long, but just on vaccination, would you recommend we vaccinate again?
I mean, that's
annually.
Hugely controversial and has been since the start. I will, let me talk to that, and then I can't finish without mentioning clotting, because it's a big one, and how we treat that, because that is happening with people. Listen, I started off being on the pro-vaccine brigade because I thought it could reduce the severity of the illness and hospitalisation, which it was initially shown to do. However, it was then shown to have these horrendous side effects in some people, and even conventional doctors like Paul Glynn, who's one of the top leading teaching hospitals in London, were seeing so much vaccine injury, and that then became a thing. It's still not talked about that much, even though these top doctors know it to be happening. There's people developing deep vein thrombosis, myocarditis, which is an inflammation of the heart lining, arthritis, other autoimmune conditions, or just fatigue, chronic fatigue.
Tinnitus is very common.
Tinnitus is an excess histamine symptom generally, and it shows your immune system, it's your nervous system on fire as well. But so I have not seen people do well with repeated vaccination. I think some people can brush it off. Those people that just don't give these things, I don't want to say power, but they're the kind of people that don't give any illness power. They just kind of dash through life and get over things very quickly. And I do want to study those kind of people because they interest me. But I think, you know, it's a spike protein, and that's essentially what most of them are, and it's generating an immune response, but it's generating an aberrant immune response in many people. That is a faulty immune response. And we kind of get stuck in a loop with that. So we're getting this mitochondrial damage, this failure to generate energy from our cells. We're getting these hyperactive or weirded out T cells that are producing too much histamine and cytokine indirectly. And you know, that is happening. So this whole nature study showing that the more you get COVID, the worse you are, and it doesn't make a difference whether you're vaccinated or not, is one of the death knells for me. So I won't be having another one anytime soon. And I have to say, I've had one AstraZeneca, and I've had like a booster dose of the second one a year later. So, and that was only because I couldn't get into Spain without it. So,
but yeah, we're seeing people coming after vaccinations, coming in for high dose vitamin C, just to get over the symptoms, initial symptoms that people can get from the vaccination. Yeah, to calm down. And I do recommend it, you know, after a vaccination, if you want to minimize, because you're going to get some of the virus, you're going to get some symptoms with it. And what you don't want is those symptoms to linger and drive a systemic inflammatory response, as we're talking about damaging your T cells, damaging your mitochondria. Then, as Tam did, do something immediately. You know, do the ozone therapy, do a treatment that's going to support your immune system ASAP. And I've been exposed to COVID, and you know, I've had it a couple of times, but I was lucky to be able to get to my workplace to do things like high dose vitamin C at the doses that Tam's talking about. We were talking early in COVID, I remember we were discussing different types of protocols, and as it was all evolving at that time, zinc, etc., you know, the antimalarials as well.
And clotting quickly, because vitamin C is anti-platelet. We are seeing a lot of, you probably heard of this, that people are getting, you know, as I mentioned, DVTs, strokes, but also, you know, just more everyday things like menstrual dysfunction, like, you know, we're getting like periods that come out as like tissue and clots, and like I remember having my blood taken and there's a clot on the end of the needle, and that happened again when I got COVID the second time. Like literally my fingers, two of my fingers went blue and then white. They literally clotted off. So I went on anticoagulant therapy for a while and did high-dose vitamin C therapy. Not everyone gets that clotting thing. There is a genetic component to it, but it can happen. So people need to stay on low dose aspirin. Also, high dose of omega-3 are very, they stop the platelets clumping. But you know, standard blood test looking at platelet level may give you that indicator, but it's definitely one with persistent chest pain. People that go out for a run or if they can, but you know, a fast walk and you're getting recurrent chest pain, that's inflammatory, but that also can have a clotting driver in that. If there's clottiness or what's the word when the blood is very sluggish, it's not getting through, as Amber said. You know, that can be because it's too high in platelets. So nattokinase is another one. It's a natural substance. It's been shown to break down platelet clots and fibrinogen in the blood. So that's all very helpful. Also just moving, as Amber said, you know, swimming is very good.
I just want to mention there's one common thread that came around is the stress element of what this disease does, and also the cofactors before coming into it. If you have a very stressful life and this disease is actually just adding to that, whether it be financial because you can't go to work or because you can't get out of bed, and the stress of you not being able to perform in the same way you did before. All of what we're saying through the hyperbaric oxygen and delivering that oxygen to the cells, working on the mitochondrial function and working on the vagus nerve, all of it is the building blocks of trying to dampen that heighten that parasympathetic nervous system and dampen your anxiety around being ill. And in order to be able to control that and tap into the reserves that you naturally possess of self-regulation, because let's not forget, before everything. I mean, and I'm a strong believer in biohacking and medicine where it's indicated and supplementation where it's indicated. But before all of this, we have always self-regulated. Our bodies have been able to self-regulate. We have to interact with the environment in a way that's healthy. And that these past couple of years have taught us that. And we're not surrounded with most cleanest of air and nature at our doorstep, etc. But we have to actually choose biohacking cheats, if you will, to get the bare resources that we need to repair. And by that we need to tap into the parasympathetic nervous system, into that vagus nerve, so it can self-modulate. Because if it can feed back into our brain of what we need, how to regulate, what your body's actually doing, then your body stands a chance to respond to all these different modalities in a way that's sustainable and self-regulatory.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. You know, one of the things I've seen working with lots of patients in this methodology over time is just the state awareness they develop over time. You know, just being aware of your state, whether you're actually in the sympathetic state or in your parasympathetic state, and then being able to develop tools that are free, simple to do, box breathing, to get you out of your sympathetic activated state, to be aware that, you know, when you look at a WhatsApp and an email and the ping goes off, it's activating your nervous system, you know. And I find that just people going through a journey like this, and engaging their health, taking control of their health and becoming more autonomous in their decision making, taking the power away from the medical system, which doesn't have the answers to all of the problems, and trying to navigate it yourself. You know, you become more state aware, and I think that's the most, when you become more state aware, more conscious of yourself, you become more conscious of your people around you, your environment. You become, I find everyone just becomes a nicer person as well, generally, right? Because when you're less stressed, you're just nicer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So stay off the forum.
Yeah.
I was going to say, stay off the Facebook group, stay off the forums, and surround yourself with healthy people.
Yeah.
Help feed into you are healthy, you are healthy.
Oh, we all going to Ibiza with you?
We should ask if anybody.
Yeah,
Does anybody have any questions?
Is there a connection between COVID and shingles?
Oh, good question. Is there a connection between COVID and shingles for everyone that didn't hear that?
So you might have heard me mention co-infections and other viruses. Shingles is caused by herpes zoster, which is a type of virus. It's an HSV virus. So your immune system usually fights that off. If your immune system is busy fighting off other viruses like COVID, then you can get a surge in HSV because it stays in the body, it stays in the nerve endings. So if you get a surge in herpes, you get a reaction which presents as shingles, which is the classic neurological rash. So absolutely, there's an association.
Can I ask, does anybody know yet if COVID stays in the system like EBV? Do we know yet where?
It doesn't live in the nerve endings but it's because it has a different method of action as in the way it comes into the body, but it does live in other different cells like the gut and other like enterocytes.
But forever, or just while it's doing its thing?
Well, we don't know. I mean, again,
so we don't know.
It's a constant flux, right? You know, some people never get reactivations of EBV, you know, or herpes. Or, you know, it's very much a constant battle and your body is constantly regulating it. But, you know, I know a lot of people, including myself, I had CMV, which inherits the thymus, which is one of the main immune system producing glands in the body. And not a lot of people know they have CMV. If only I only knew it because I tested myself to the hilt. And when I took a couple of courses of valacyclovir, which is an antiviral, which isn't as effective on COVID virus itself, it's a different type of virus, but I felt a lot better and the levels went down. So if you offload the burden of other viruses, like if you treat EBV if it's reactivated, if you treat herpes if it's reactivated, your chances of recovering from the effects of COVID are going to be enhanced.
Anyone else?
That's the question.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, what would you say is a good maintenance protocol for post long COVID? Because for me it was real feast or famine. There was all these treatments, these things, the needles, the hyperbaric.
Yeah, go for it.
and it can be a full-time job.
Yeah.
So once you're out of that and you're kind of on your road to recovery and back in normal life, what would you, given that you are dealing with these things all day, every day, what would you say is a good
Maintenance.
Yeah.
It depends what you're looking to achieve with the body. And I mean, just what we're saying, why do we go in and out of states of breakouts of herpes or breakouts of other immune problems? We just got to be conscious of what's going on in our environment. If we're going through a stressful period, get some support in biologically, make sure you got your supplements. Make sure you're taking. That's when I would say, as a maintenance approach, to look at your body in that way. Give it some support when you know you're going to need to drive it through rough terrain. Because that's when you're.
Once a week hyperbaric doesn't really do any good, or it
would be fantastic for you once a week hyperbaric. That's 50 sessions a year. That's a longevity protocol. That would be fantastic for you. But that's if you're looking to achieve longevity. Maybe add years to your life. By slowing down the aging process. That's what the longevity protocol is. 40 sessions a year, albeit back to back. But I believe if you're doing it regularly, you're going to get a similar effect, maybe 70 to 80% of that effect. So it depends what you're looking to achieve. If you're trying to maintain your immune system to be strong, resilient, supplementation, nutrition, lifestyle, self-awareness, breathing techniques, meditation, daylight, stress management generally. And then if you find that your body's now going to go through an extra difficult time, a divorce or, God forbid, but other stuff that life brings you, challenges at times, then that's the time where I say, okay, I'm going through a tough patch. Let's go into a place like us. Let's get some support, IV, hyperbaric support, or reach out to Tam, or I think Helen's going to be a proxy doctor one day. And
listen, I found a way to score Paxlovid today in the US without a doctor. So, and I didn't even. So, just for fun, a lot of us, she won't like this, but a lot of us have worked out, how to play the system. So you can get a lot of these meds from India. Ivermectin, one of my doctors gave me the name of a pharmacy in India. So you can, it's really difficult because the NHS won't give it to you. There are a lot of drugs that aren't available here, they're available. But what I've learned because of this enormous community of people who I don't even know, I just talk to them on Instagram. There's one of them today just talked me through the whole process of how you get a drug you need, including like an HIV drug. Here's a number. And I was like, Jesus Christ. So there is, if you want something badly enough, and Tam can't safely prescribe most of these, but sometimes it happened with the HIV community. How do you think they got where they got? They didn't do it by waiting patiently for the doctor to do something. They took things into their own hands, and a lot of the people I talk to are they shouldn't be, they can't afford private doctors, are self-medicating from India. They're using the Dr. Patterson protocol, which is the US protocol for long COVID, which many are doing, where you send your bloods and then they give you this prescription for things like statins and rock and ivermectin, and it's I don't think you approve of it anyway, but...
I don't approve of any of this, but I think at the end of the day, these drugs are regulated for a reason because they have bad side effects, and I think if I can't advocate, Helen has me on WhatsApp all the time, obviously, to check in, but honestly,
not everybody does.
I can't recommend going to India and taking antivirals and anti-this and anti-that because I see too many people fall off the other side because they don't know what they're monitoring. What are you monitoring? You're throwing 17 things into the mix. What blood marker are you looking at? What wearable data are you looking at? Like, what are you looking at? This isn't a system where we don't trust our bodies and our process anymore. So I think it can end up in a real mess.
You can have a downward spiral, right?
Yeah. But there is one thing that actually came out. So I was talking to the woman I couldn't come today, who's raised 10 million for long COVID. She's an extraordinary advocate, an incredibly intelligent woman. And she's in the Ukraine getting some incredibly dangerous treatment at the moment. But what she said as someone who spent...
Why would you go to the Ukraine?
I don't know. I think she's doing... Because they're using antivirals in the Ukraine that they don't have here. So she said, you should come to the Ukraine. I thought, yes, that's all I need right now. But she said, and she's been doing this with doctors in the US, that the fastest way to move, if you really, is, and I know you don't agree with me on this, is fasting. So I am on a lot of forums, and people are getting enormous results through fasting. Some people are doing 3-day dry fast, which I think I'd just keel over with. But if you really want to change something, try fasting, try intermittent fasting, OMAD, which is 1 meal a day, which I find very easy to do. But people say that that's the thing that shifted. And if you can do it, do a full day, full fast. But it reduces inflammation, it raises cortisol, which in this case might be a good thing. But that is why clinics like the Meyer, so Mirabelle here has had, she's been to the Meyer, and wouldn't you say that the fasting aspect has been helpful? Also do hyperbaric, but...
Yeah, I mean, the Viva Mare has been very helpful, yes. But that was the alkaline diet, in fact. That was what was so helpful to me there. And the Creo and the oxygenation of the blood. That oxygenation actually.
But you meant the masks thing. You liked those.
Ozone as well.
Also the infusion.
Do you remember you and I didn't like them at all?
It's called Celgin, it's intermittent hypoxia training, so they flood you with oxygen withdrawal.
Yes.
But my only problem with fasting is that that number one thing, it's a stressor, right? So what I don't advocate is people being at home, fasting, and especially not dry fast, and living a life, especially if they're in a state of hypervigilance. If you go to the Mayo Clinic or the Lanzerhof or to another beautiful clinic in France, and you will have a supported fast for a short period of time, then I can advocate for that. But I see too many people fall off the bandwagon doing fasting wrong at home and ending up with adrenal thyroid issues in the worst state.
Can I just add to that? I see people depleting themselves of nutrients as well, right? Like if you're not getting the key nutrients in, the vitamin C from your food, the B's, the minerals that you need, and you're putting yourself, especially when you're acutely inflamed, I think, just think of yourself with long COVID as going through ups and downs. When you're more inflamed, I would avoid doing things like fasting without support of nutrients.
And what about things like cold showers? How much pressure, if you're like me with my glands coming up, do I do cold showers, or is it just is my system saying you need to rest, which is what it really is telling me? So is a cold shower then...
I think you've just given the answer. If you feel like your body is telling you to rest, then that is the answer.
The other thing that I at the end of the day helps me most is bed rest. If you just... Because in the old days, we used to get illnesses and we spent 3 months in clinics. People used to spend 3 months in rehabilitation. But I now, and I think a lot of people who do this, what I've learned is just go to bed, take your computer, watch movies, just stay in bed. And if I do a full day in bed, the next day I'm okay. So I reckon if I do 3 days in bed, 4 days in bed, and it's actually, I can work, I can talk on the telephone, but there is something about allowing your body to have that level of rest.
But not everyone needs that, right? Like,
or has time for it.
Where you're at in your healing journey. I definitely couldn't spend a day in bed. But we're all different. But the key is restorative rest, right? Restorative rest. It doesn't have to be Netflix in bed, but it could be.
Shall we call that a wrap? We could break up for questions. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.